Welcome to Teen Zim, and with me in the studio, his name is Coach Tafazwa. How are you doing, Coach?
I'm great. How you doing?
I'm lovely, thank you. So this morning we're talking about what we want versus what we are creating.
Yes. When I was thinking about this, I was thinking about this experience that many of us have had. You know how when sometimes you've got your earphones or headphones plugged to your ears and you're listening to your favorite song and then you're singing along, and in your mind you think you're nailing it. In your mind you're thinking you're singing it as good as the artist, if not even better. But then if somebody were to record
Ish.
how you're singing and then you
Disaster.
listen to it, you'll be like, oh, is this is this what I was doing? So you know what, there's usually that big gap between what we are trying to do and then what we then get. So today we're talking about what we or what parents are trying to create, the kind of generation that they're trying to create out of their children, or the kind of future adults that they're trying to create out of their children versus what they in reality are actually creating.
All right.
So first of all, I think I've spoken about this quite a number of times. You know, there's this thing that a lot of parents are quite proud of. You know how from a very tender age, from as early as the time a child is just able to hold something, they're already given access to a phone and they can play with it. And parents would even brag about how my child can do everything on the phone. Chingompa iPhone, ane 1 year, but anotoenda kuma photos, anoto tambama games. They can literally do
They can
everything.
unlock the phone.
Yeah, all of
Yeah.
that. And we're speaking with it with so much pride. But what we do not realize is that between the ages 0 to around 7, that's where a lot of brain wiring is happening. So the brain formation is happening there, and how that child will view things, their worldview, their perspectives, are all being shaped by their experience on the phone, because they're spending a lot of time on the phone. So what you don't realize is, you know how it is when you're on the phone, you're trying to move from one application to another and things are happening so fast. There's a lot of stimulation there. You're creating a child who then becomes very impatient, a child who can't focus, whose attention span is very little, very small, because during their formative years, when their brain was still being wired, that's the thing that they were exposed to, and that's how the brain was actually shaped. Now it's time to go to school, and you're trying to have them concentrate in class. A 15-minute lesson to them is very long and boring, because they're used to moving from one thing to another within a minute, within seconds. So this is something that you may not realize, okay, where is this coming from? When I was a child, I wasn't like this. We would go into class, we would concentrate, we would do one thing for a long time. Why is my child behaving like this? But what you don't realize is that whilst you're giving them the phone, in your mind you are creating a child who's techie savvy, who's going to be responsible. But what you don't realize is that you actually created a child who's got a very short attention span, a child who's very impatient, a child who lacks social skills, because they used to be on the screens and they're still on the phone. They can't even spare a moment to say magadi and you tete magadi and you sekuru. And now when you're in the moment and it's happening, you get frustrated and you're even emotional about it. Iwe moresa vanu itai. But what you don't realize is you're the one who actually groomed them to be this kind of a person who's now antisocial, who can't spare moments to actually have real conversations with real people, because they were just used to being on the phone. You know, I was thinking to myself, just 2-3 years ago, that's when COVID happened and we were in lockdowns. Sometimes we never really stopped to think about the impact that that period had, especially on our kids. So whilst we were in lockdown, whilst everything was online, things were happening to their brain depending on the developmental stage that they were at. Things were happening to their brains. Now that we are off that season, we are starting to see some of the consequences. But because we may not think back, we may not reflect, we may not even realize that, oh, this is what caused it. We are here because of that period that we went through. So it's important that we deliberately, intentionally limit the time that our children are spending on the phones, are spending on the screens. Because apart from these other behaviors that I've talked about, there's also sleep deprivation. Because when somebody is used to being on the phone, they always want to be on the phone. You know how when you are watching something, you're like, let me just watch for the next 3 minutes and then I'll be done. And then after 3 minutes, you're like, let me just add a few minutes. And before you know it, it's 3 a.m. and you're still up and on your phone. And this is the child who now, when they're supposed to be in class, they're always sleeping because they didn't sleep. Why? Because they were on the phone and they couldn't put it down. Because whoever makes applications on the phone, the new apps, social media apps, and all that are being created, the intention is obviously to get people glued to their phone.
True.
The more people get glued on their phones, the more clicks on the app and all that, the more whoever made that application is happy and makes money. So that's the whole point. So if we do not then help our children and get them off those gadgets, we are creating adults who will be very difficult to deal with, because that's how they would have been wired. And it was a try akura, that would be very difficult. And then there's also something that I've discovered, especially about social media. You know, most of the conversations that we end up getting involved with, we do not have the full context. You know, a social media is just like a public square where people are just engaging in conversations. And so maybe you're passing through the square and then you hear a certain word, but you don't know what was the context, but you're forced to be part of that conversation, and now you're weighing in and you're also giving your own thoughts, and sometimes you even get emotional about it, but you don't have the full context. So now we're having a situation where even children are getting involved in conversations that they shouldn't be, that they were not even supposed to be part of. You know how even in churches we have kuchina, you don't go with your child because of what's going to be discussed there.
Yes.
But now on social media, everything is discussed and everyone has access to what's being discussed. So all of that is shaping our children. So things that you maybe only had access to when you were married, now your 10-year-old is having access to that. And what do they do with that information? You know, apart from just the information, think about this culture that we now have where we film everything. We take photos. Maybe it's an accident. It's actually a fatal one. We take pictures. We post on WhatsApp groups. And whilst we're doing that, maybe the moment that you've just sent that, a phone is with a child, a 5-year-old, a 6-year-old, and then now they're exposed to all these pictures. And what is that doing to their brain? You know, when I was young, I remember, well, I don't even remember like seeing a corpse when I was still young. I think the first time I would see a dead person was when I was an adult, when I was already above 21. And I think there was a reason why back then adults would say "Vana abafane kuona izvi," because they knew the impact of that, what it would do to their young minds. But now there is no censorship. Children are just getting exposed to all of that, and all of that is shaping their mindsets. It's shaping their brains. So the reason why I'm talking about this is sometimes we suffer from this. It's called the law of unintended consequences.
Okay.
So things are happening and you're thinking, well, it's just this, there's no problem with it. But what you don't realize is there are consequences, and you only then realize the consequences sometimes when it's too late. So what am I saying? What I'm saying is, as much as you can, parents, please try and limit your children's screen time, especially the very little ones, the ones who are not yet 7, because that is the time where their brains are being formed. Because vanga vari mudumbu, they didn't know anything. Now they are out, and this is what they're being exposed to for the first time, and this is what's going to determine how they think, how they view things. And then outside the social media, which I've dwelt quite a lot on, there's also the issue of communication. There is what I call miscommunication. So miscommunication sometimes, you know, there are a lot of times when a child would maybe come back from school and say, somebody came to our school, they taught us about the importance of working hard in school, how we can be anything that we want to be. And then maybe as a parent you're sitting, or as a dad or mom, and you're saying, but no garage one every day. But to the child,
Okay.
it's like, no, that's not what you say. You think you will be saying that, but then the way you say it
Matters.
yes.
Yes.
matters. You miscommunicate, because maybe you're saying it with very harsh tones. Maybe ndanonoka kudzoka uri kuti nekunonoka kwawaita ikoko uchafoira, ukafoira you won't be able to be this and that. So because the mood and the environment is tense, the child will not get the information. And sometimes there's also information overload. I remember like eavesdropping into this conversation, a mom and a 6-year-old airamba kuita homework. Zvinzi uri kuramba kuita homework, uchakura uchaita rombe uchaita sei. So it's just overload. A 6-year-old can't wrap their head around the information that you're giving them. If you're going to make sense to them, then you have to speak in their language, in a language that they understand. It's too much for them. Probably in their mind they're trying to imagine or even asking themselves, so what is rombe? What is that? And you think you've communicated, but they haven't gotten anything from it. And just the emotional state. If you're angry, chances are you will your information will not be had. And then also ambiguity. Sometimes we feel our children understand what we are saying when they actually can't. There's certain sarcasm that's not age appropriate. A child will not be able to catch your meaning, and you're thinking I've communicated, but they haven't had. It's like that cliche statement that most parents would say to their children, especially their daughters. Depending on the age, a child may not even understand what you're saying, and you're thinking you fully communicated what you wanted, but to their mind they're like, okay, so how exactly does this happen? And you haven't communicated. And then there's also non-communication, where sometimes there's just lack of active listening. You're not listening to your child, so because your child feels like, okay, you don't listen to me when it's my turn to speak. When you're also speaking, I don't listen to you. So we're thinking we're communicating, but we're actually not. And then there's also the issue of avoidance of certain subjects. So there are certain things that parents are thinking, oh, maybe my child is too young to be listening to this. I can't be telling them this. But what you don't realize is you're saying that it's too early to discuss these subjects with your child, yet you've given them access to the phone. And from as early as 7, 8, they were already getting information about the subjects. Sometimes you'd be surprised you hear 10-year-olds or even younger kids discussing about a movie that they watched, and they're like, oh, so in this movie this guy is in a situationship with this lady,
and it gets disturbing.
And you're like, they already know all of that. And yet as a parent you're thinking, I'm not supposed to be talking about puberty, I'm not supposed to be talking about dating with them because it's too early. Yet somebody has already been teaching them something. So that's non-communication. And because we're not communicating these issues, whilst we're thinking we're creating a generation of kids who are responsible, who don't know all this other dirty information, we're actually doing the opposite, because we're not helping them to unlearn the wrong things that they may have learned from the wrong sources. And then the last one I'll talk about in terms of communication here, there's aggressive communication. So sometimes it's caused by how parents become very emotional or very angry because of maybe childhood unresolved traumas. Maybe there were circumstances leading to the birth of this child. Things happened and the mom never had, or the dad never had, a time to actually discuss these issues and resolve them. So now they project their anger and their bitterness to the child. So they may be trying to communicate something, but then because it's communicated with a lot of anger, with a lot of aggression, the child at the end of the day doesn't get to understand what you're trying to say. And also lastly, because of time, I'll talk about just lack of resources. I was having conversations at church, I think on Sunday, and we were talking about how there are limited resources, especially Christian resources when it comes to certain subjects. Talk about dating, talk about marriage and all. There's very limited resources. And when children then go online to Google about stuff, they get information from AI, they get information from Google, and all the sources that they're getting information from are obviously biased to the training of whoever is responsible for them. So if they want your children to go a certain direction, that's what they're going to learn, and that may not be compatible with the kind of values that you want your child to actually uphold as a parent. So having said that, I've actually started working on building resources that I'm going to be sharing with parents, that they can share with their children, resources that can help answer certain questions that children have, and they don't always have to look for information on their own. So if you're a parent of a teenager, a parent of a teen daughter, and you want some of the resources that I'm talking about, please feel free to just send in your name to my WhatsApp number, and then you request for the resources, and I'll be able to send you. But what I've discovered is that many people just love resources, but they don't like reading. So when you send in your name and your request, I'll send you maybe a one-pager, and then if you read it and give me feedback, I'll then send you the big thing. So my WhatsApp number is 0773 606 728. 0773 606 728.
Right, Coach Tafaz, it's always a pleasure having you in the studio, and thank you so much. What we want versus what we are creating is what we're talking about today. And you can catch Coach Tafaz again next week on teenzim.com. Hot issues for parents and teenagers. Yeah, we are Star FM, sounding good all the time. Check time, it's 11, it's time for the news.
This is Zim Papers Radio.